Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Red Circle, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Also, the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, turn the notifications on. We got plenty of content coming from Messi's introduction with Inter Miami. Also, check us out on Off the Floor. Go to winnow.app/off the floor. That's Winnow. That's two N's in there. Winnow.app/off the floor. Get text directly from the four of us on everything Miami Heat before it goes to Twitter, and sometimes it doesn't go to Twitter at all, and maybe you don't want to even open Twitter. So go to winnow.app/off the floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Our friend Mark and his team over at U-Break Wheel Fix. Check them out at ubreakwheelfix.com. That's ubreakwheelfix.com. Or in Aventura, this is a complete wheel solution. They do everything for you, the repairs, the unforgiving roads of South Florida. They also do refinishing. They can do the fancy colors for you as well. Everything that they can do that's cool and updated is on their Instagram page. So check them out. That's with a U at the start. That's U-Break Wheel Fix or ubreakwheelfix.com. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
Hey, it's Ethan Skolnick back on Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick or at Five Reasons Sports. You can also follow me on Threads. Not sure if you want to do that because I'm not really that in tune with it yet, but I don't know. You can give that a shot. Also got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. We are back with you here. I've taken a couple of days off. Just been sort of waiting for things to play out. Of course, not a whole lot new in the Dame sweepstakes, just people speculating at this point. Summer League ending a few hours after we record this on a Sunday with actually the Heat playing Portland. We'll have a playback on that. So if you hear this before that, you can join us on playback. And of course, the winner of that gets Dame. But we're going to talk about a different player today. Alice, we're going to get into Tyler Herro a little bit more specifically because, as this has dragged out, people kind of stake positions, right? So, there is a segment of the Heat fan base that sort of has extreme opinions on Tyler one way or the other, right? Like, there's one segment and the extreme is greatest player has ever lived, hasn't been given a fair chance by this organization. And then there's the other extreme, which is not a player who can help you, not core to everything they've done the past couple of years, easily replaceable, contract is too much. And I just feel like we should address this, even if it may be fringe elements here, because he's really the guy in the crossfire right now. We could talk about Duncan Robinson has been in these trade rumors for a while. I think Kyle Lowry, sort of understands what the deal is. It's about his contract, but Tyler is the Caron Butler here. Tyler is the Glenn Rice here. Tyler is the player who is sacrificed to get the better player. And I think sometimes when that happens, we end up casting aspersions on the player, even if it's not deserved. As Ira has reported, and this is as far as I know too, the only players that Tyler's really been included for a trade have been Kevin Durant and Dame Lillard. I mean, these are two of the top 75 players of all time. They're two of the top 5 scorers in the game today. And I don't think it reflects poorly on him that Miami would be looking to move on from him only for a player like that. It's not like they've just been trying to dump him. And even if the trade looks like they're dumping him because they're just getting a pick for him, the ultimate goal is to get Dame Lillard. So first, let me go to you on this. What is your view on the two extremes before we get into whether or not the Heat have actually treated Tyler poorly in this situation?
Well, I guess the two extremes, you could say there's always going to be extremes when it comes to players like Tyler, guys who are kind of polarizing, and I think has been sort of polarizing, not only with Heat fans, but with NBA fans who don't know much about him, admittedly. And I think, I think both of us tend to kind of be somewhere in the middle, and I think that's what the majority of fans are with Tyler. I don't think a lot of people hate him. I think there's kind of a loud majority of people who've been trashing him for years. And there's people... There's a minority of people who think that he can be a great all-star type of player. And I think most Heat fans and are somewhere in the middle, right? And I think that's where we are too. I think, for one thing, the Heat absolutely nailed that pick, right? When they drafted him at 13 or 14, whatever it was, they nailed that pick. It's absolutely been a hit. He was a big time contributor for you in the bubble year. And then it's just kind of been unfortunate ever since that he hasn't really had a real chance to show off what he can do when it matters most. And I think that part of it has kind of it's made the conversation a little bit more complicated, right? Because it's a lot of theorizing and what Tyler would look like with the Heat in if he's healthy in the playoffs. And I don't think we really got that chance to see it. Last year, was it in the Sixers series that he got hurt? Do I have that right, or was it the Atlanta series?
It was the Sixers series. He didn't play particularly well in the Atlanta series,
Yeah.
the way that they guarded him, but then it was the Sixers series that he actually got hurt.
That's what I thought. And yeah, like he didn't play well. I agree with you against Atlanta. And kind of after he got hurt, it was just it went off the rails. He tried to come back against the Celtics in game 7, did not work out well at all. They took him out and did not play him again. And then this year gets hurt diving for a loose ball. I mean, how many times did we hear, not only this season, but I'm sure you've heard it a million times in the past, of how important it is for the Heat to have like their nose on the ball and first to the ball. Like I can't remember the exact phrase that they will constantly repeat this season. But it had a lot to do with being first to the ball and all that. They constantly emphasize that. So for him to go out that way, I think is really disappointing. But look, man, it's hard to not think of Tyler as a very good player. And I know we've had these conversations with the Dame stuff, and we talked about a lot of this stuff on playback. It seems like there seems to be a really big gap between Tyler Herro and the way that people look at him compared to some of the other guys that are more or less in his tier of production, age, all of that, right? Like the guy that's been coming up most in that conversation is Tyrese Maxey. Personally, I don't think there's that much of a gap between the two. If you want to say Maxey's better because he can get to the rim more often and that's more important than some of the stuff that Tyler's better at, I get it. But I don't think it kind of shows out the way that people make it sound like. He doesn't get to the free throw line that much more than Tyler. And I think he's playing, as a nice third wheel to Harden and Embiid, whatever. He's 1 year younger, but he's going to get paid a lot more once he signs that extension, which is going to be basically Desmond Bane money, most likely. I think Tyler Herro, at the contract that he's on, because I know that's part of the conversation here, is ever since he got that 125 mil or 120 mil, whatever it was, I think it's pretty fair. Like a guy who can give you 20, 21 points per game, did it as a 6th man of the year, did it as a starter this year, playing on and off the ball. He's a tremendous offensive player. I think because of the fact that he has so many questions and limitations on defense, people kind of trash who he is and have tried to put him in the box as like this microwave bench scorer. He's clearly better than that. He is absolutely clearly a starter level player, was their 3rd best player all season. I don't know. I just think it's a little, it's just kind of where we're at, right? Like Jimmy and Bam were never going to get traded. The Heat are trying to build around them. And just kind of logically, the next best thing that they have to offer is Tyler Herro, who's 23 years old, has been incredibly productive over the years. I think it has less to do with him as a player and more about just the situation that the Heat are in. Like you mentioned, putting him in trade conversations for Durant, now for Damian Lillard. The Harden stuff happened a couple of years ago as well. So when people try to say, oh, the Heat are always trying to trade Tyler and this and that, it's so overblown. It honestly, like, it's just where they're at. Like he is a product of where they're at in their kind of in their timeline. I just think he's going to be the one that's out of there.
Well, and they always have these builds, and then there always comes a point where somebody becomes the guy that has to be moved to move them forward. And, I've mentioned Rice at the beginning because that was the one asset that the Heat had when Pat showed up. But if you go forward and you go to, again, Jamal Mashburn, they added him as the 3rd piece. Ultimately, though, he was the piece that had to be moved along with their 4th piece, PJ Brown, to get Eddie Jones. And then when they had Shaq and Wade, Eddie Jones was the piece, that had to be moved to flip the roster around again. And this has happened over and over and over. And that's why we always say it's always the 3rd guy. It's the 3rd guy because their builds are really 2-player builds. Now, it was a little bit different with LeBron and Dwayne, but if they had lost in Boston in 2012 in that game 6, Chris Bosh is the guy who would have been moved. It wasn't going to be LeBron or Dwayne. We don't know if it actually would have happened, but there certainly was a lot of noise around it at the time. This is just what they do. And if they don't have 2 core players, then they keep looking for them. I mean, we can talk about the Whiteside, Richardson, James Johnson, Deion Waiters era. They didn't have 2 guys, okay? But when they have 2 guys, it's the third guy that they look to flip either from multiple pieces to make the depth better around the top 2, okay, which is what they did with Eddie and why they traded him, or it's to try to get the big-time star that can play with the top 2 and be a co-headliner. And so Tyler was always going to be in that position. But I want to be clear about a couple of things here, because I feel like this has gotten sort of out of sorts here. I think because Tyler has emoted a little bit on social media, even if it's cryptic, and so people are reading into everything. But here's what a national NBA guy, a prominent national NBA guy, one of the 5 names that you would mention, said to me when he saw me at the finals, he said that contract was given to Tyler to move him. He was always going to be moved. Okay, now this is somebody who believes that Pat's always looking for the next Orca or whatever, but that's the way it was put to me. He's like, it's just a matter of time. It's just a question of which team and which star that you can get. And so, again, this was during a period of time where we were having a discussion about whether Tyler was going to come back for the finals and whether it was the Heat that were holding him out or himself who was holding him out, or what kind of games everybody was playing. And he basically said to me, look, Tyler was always going to get moved. He got the contract. And so I just want to say this about it, okay? I understand that it's frustrating for anybody, particularly 23 years old, who's accomplished a lot and wanted to accomplish more and was going into the playoffs this year thinking he was going to have a big postseason. And he does check everything on social media. He told me that. And he does kind of get frustrated by what the fans say. And I understand it's an uncomfortable position to be in. But just from the Heat's perspective, okay, they gave him the extension, okay? So they made sure that he would get paid either way. So that's not mistreatment, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is the Heat, okay, and even Tyler's teammates and even us in the media recognize that it may not have been in the best interest of the team to make Tyler a starter from the jump last year, even though we all agreed on 5 on the floor he deserved it. But just from team construction, lineup construction, that his best role on this team may have been the one he was in, where he won the award. But the Heat did it anyway. They did it anyway when they don't typically do that kind of stuff if they know that it has a possibility to work against their interests on the court. They did it anyway. So they gave him the contract and they gave him the starting role. And it's not like he did anything wrong by any of it. Okay, he played at a higher level this past season than he did the previous season. He worked hard. He did the right things. Nobody's criticizing him for that. But this small segment that is out there saying the Heat are mistreating him, I mean, they basically gave him the 2 things that he wanted. The money and the starting role, okay? I mean, beyond that, if you're talking about a top 75 player, a guy who just is coming off his best season, then I don't know how anybody can say he's being mistreated as long as they're communicating with him, which my understanding is they are. And I don't think they want to send him to a place that he doesn't want to be. And I think the best case scenario for all of this is Brooklyn, because you're talking about he can be on the marquee. He's going to be a primary scorer. They're going to be competitive. It's a relatively young team with Claxton and Bridges and Cam Johnson that he can grow with. He plays in the Heat's conference, so if he wants to get payback, he can get it that way. I think it's a perfect situation for him. Now, if he gets sent to, say, I mean, OKC is a young, thriving, they're going to be awesome in 3-4 years. But I don't know if he wants to be in OKC with he likes to be in the spotlight a little bit more. But I don't know. I mean, if they sent him to Utah, okay, I can understand.
Charlotte.
Right, Charlotte. But, I mean, if they're going to send him to Brooklyn, I don't know how he can be mad about that. I really don't.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to disagree with what you said there. Like, I think the progressions have been there with Tyler. They've given him, year after year, more responsibility with, to go along with the production that he's shown and him being ahead of schedule since he was drafted. Like, again, he came in as a rotation player at 19 years old. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's not something that he, of course, you can speak on that. That's not something that he do very often. It's somebody who didn't come in with any sort of, athletic, crazy body build, who's just this, dominant athlete. None of that stuff. The guy had a negative wingspan, wasn't considered an elite athlete by any means. And everybody thought he was just kind of a shooter. And he showed way more than that from the jump and has only gotten better ever since. I think it's taken steps in every season, right? There hasn't maybe been a giant leap yet, but steps in every season. And that's what you want to see from a player like that. And that's to go along with added responsibility in every year. So the positives are there. The signs are there that this guy has gotten better every year. And really, I think with the added responsibility, he showed a lot. Not that he's, I think, done developing as a player or anything like that. I think the more he grows into his body and the more reps and years he gets, he's only going to get better. But man, I just think I don't know what else the Heat could have done. Like you said, they started him, they paid him, they've given him all the responsibility, they made him the third best player, they've talked about him to the public, not just in the past years, but the last time Pat Riley spoke, right, he was talking about Tyler Herro being a core, being a pillar for this organization. So I think they've given him the proper respect. Now, what I will say is, from the other hand, if I'm trying to, kind of get into Tyler's brain a little bit, I could see why that part would be a little bit confusing. It's like, well, you guys have been talking about me as a part of your core for years, and you reiterated that again with Pat Riley, right? And yet I'm in trade rumors every single summer. Now, I know that he hasn't been exactly put on the table every single time, and I was going to get into this on a couple podcasts ago before my mic went out, but you think about it, like he was in the rumors when he first got drafted for Chris Paul and Westbrook. Not that he was thrown on the table or anything like that. But then you go after that, there was the Ingram stuff, that there was the Harden stuff, there was the Durant stuff. There now it's the last year also was Donovan Mitchell. There's just been time and time again that even though he may not have been put on the table every time, he has had to hear these rumors over and over, and it kind of from his end, it probably contradicts what the Heat are saying to him and saying publicly, which is, you're part of our core, you're a pillar of our organization, all these things, which I'm sure they believe. But again, it doesn't mean that they're not willing to move him. So I'm with you. Kind of an unfortunate situation for Tyler, I think.
I'm with you, but we've got to. Okay, what we've got to do is we've got to separate what is like fan rumors and what is actually happening. Because I think what's occurred here is because he does follow social media so closely. Because he doesn't stay away from it, because he uses it to drive him, he has likely seen many, many things that were not true. Okay, that were not true. Like just were not simply. And look, even going back to 2 years ago, I'll tell you flat out. I mean, I heard, I ran it by people inside and outside the organization. So what are the chances Tyler gets traded this offseason? And they told me 75%. And I reported that. And I know that got back, okay, and all that. And I also know that, there were reports out there about work ethic, it was never about work ethic. It was the Heat were concerned about focus at one point. I say at one point, okay, because I do not believe that's been an issue over the past year plus. They were concerned about focus at one point, and I expressed that in my conversations with them. But it wasn't about once he got on the court, they weren't concerned about whether he put in the work on the court. Those are two different things, okay? And that got misconstrued also and got put out there in a way. I think that he consumed it, inaccurately, which is not his fault. It's just that this is what happens. We're in an aggregation world, and we're also in a world where people have agendas and they're trying to push out agendas about him. And people, like I said at the very beginning of this, have staked out agendas that are completely diametrically opposed to each other. And so I don't even think, I think what's happened here is, I think that there's been some reaction to stuff that was not true, which makes it seem like the Heat have not valued him at all, which is not accurate. Okay, but then there's also the other side of this, because I know when we did a podcast right after Riley's comments about Tyler, and Greg and I basically said, okay, Pat's priming him for a trade because that's what Pat does in those situations. I had the Herro stands out there calling me an idiot. Pat wouldn't say this if he was thinking of ever trading him and all the rest of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, fine. I have 25 years of Pat Riley press conferences as background. This isn't against Tyler. This is just what he does. So I guess where I come down on it is the two sides get hysterical. And I think that gets translated back in a way that he consumes it, that it's not really about the Heat. It's not really about the Heat, okay? Again, I don't think anything that they've done in this scenario, and maybe something will come out after that he feels that they lied to him. I don't know. He's never said that, okay? But who knows? You never know in these situations. Players go to other teams, and then they speak their truth, right? They speak their minds. But again, they paid him. They They gave him a starting job, okay? And I do believe that they value him. But we're talking about Dame Lillard. And I just, it's, if you're going to be mentioned in a trade, like be mentioned for a top 75 guy. And
it's not like he would be getting dumped like Jordan Poole, who they had to throw in picks. They had to throw in picks to trade Jordan Poole
to Washington. Okay,
to Washington,
right? I mean, so for basically the corpse of Chris Paul, like we're not talking about Dame Lillard at 33 now is a lot different than Chris Paul at 37, okay, or whatever he is. So I think that's what's happened here, and I think that both sides have been a little ridiculous about this. Tyler Herro is a very good young player. I don't think that his value has been impacted really one way or the other by the fan discourse. I know people talk about that. I really don't think so. Teams make their evaluations based on what they see on tape and what they hear talking to other coaches around the league, whether it's assistants or scouts or anything along those lines. I don't think the fact that you have some people who just troll Tyler all day long on Twitter is having an effect, and that's the reason that he can't get 2 first-round picks for him. I think his value in the modern economy of the NBA, which is affected by the new CBA, is 1 decent first-round pick. Okay, I think prior to the new CBA, where having a third player at that price became kind of exorbitant, it might have been 2 first-round picks. But I think right now it's 1 first-round pick, most likely a decent first-round pick that can be flipped. It's not having to attach a pick to him, which was that report that came out of New York, which I didn't understand because Ian Begley's a very good reporter and not a flamethrower in any way, but he said the Nets were looking for a first-round pick with Tyler. Why would the Heat attach a first-round pick with Tyler Herro? I think it's gone to extremes here. I think on the other side of this, what I want to get into here with you real quick is if he goes somewhere else, what can be expected? I mean, are the Heat going to regret moving him in 2 years? They've never really regretted trading anybody. I mean, Glenn Rice became an all-star after he left Miami, but the Heat had Zoe, so there was no regret. It's the only regret was you couldn't keep both, okay? So we'll talk about that here in a second. Before we do, you won't regret this. Get your seafood. Get your premium seafood from Ocean's Finest. Go to oceansfinest.com. That's oceansfinest.com. Get it fast. Get it fresh. Oceansfinest.com. This is the stuff, the lobster, the mahi, the shrimp that is delivered to the best cruise lines. It's delivered to the 5-star restaurants. This is not the stuff they throw in the back. This is the stuff they want to highlight. Go to oceansfinest.com. You can see everything there. And again, you get it delivered quickly. When I ordered, I had it delivered within 24 hours. It was delivered carefully in a freezer box. Everything was taken care of. Go to oceansfinest.com. Again, oceansfinest.com. And I do want to mention Prize Picks. Use our code 5, FIVE. Should have played Wimbledon today. Go to Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. We know there's no NBA. Summer League is ending. You can play MLB, MMA, and much more. The NFL futures, we're starting to do shows on that as well. Go to Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE. Let me ask you this. He's 23 years old. Let's say he's traded. Is there any chance of regret here? Unless Dame, if Dame gets hurt, blows out a knee in the first 2 weeks of the season, and is that the only way?
I think that's about it. That's exactly what went through my head when you first brought up that question. I think it would have to be, God forbid, and let me just throw this in here because I have to, as part of my brand at this point, if the Heat land Damian Lillard and if something terrible were to happen to him, I think that's the one scenario where it would be like, oh man, trading Tyler might not have been the greatest thing in the world. Like if it's something where Dame, it affects Dame's long-term outlook, right? Not like some sort of injury where he'll be back, even if it's a month or two, nothing like that. I'm talking about a serious injury that would affect him playing at the level that he's been playing at and kind of takes him down a couple tiers or whatever, and I think that's such a far-fetched thing where it's like, yeah, if it happens, it's terrible. But look, Tyler's going to be a good player. I think there won't be any regret, but the one thing you
lost you there for a second.
There goes my mic. Yeah, the one thing you could pick at is that they'd be trading a 23-year-old for a 33-year-old, and I think that's a fair thing to say. But there's not going to be any regret. If Damian Lillard is still playing at the level that he's been playing at, just coming off kind of a career year when it comes to production, efficiency, even though he was on a terrible team, He's still doing his thing at an extremely high level. No signs of decline yet. There's not going to be any regret. Like this is exactly what you do when you're in a championship contending window. I'm sure they would love to keep Tyler alongside Damian Lillard. Like I'm sure if that was an option, they would probably go for it if they could make that happen, right? And just keep Tyler, whether as a sixth man, a starter, or a trade piece for something else down the line, right? I think they would love to do that, but it's just not going to be on the table. And you have to give up your 23-year-old, very productive player for a guy who, like you mentioned, is a top 75 player of all time, is a top 15, 10 player right now, still at the top of his game. And, it's just, it kind of is what it is at this point. Like, I think he's going to be a good player wherever he goes. I think Brooklyn will be the best case scenario for everybody involved. It seems like he wouldn't mind ending up there. I know people were pointing out that he follows Dorian Finney-Smith on Instagram, that he follows Ben Simmons on Instagram, that he was working out with Ben Simmons at UM. I don't take much into that stuff. Plenty of NBA players work out in Miami during the offseason. They could be cool and not be teammates, right? And they could be cool, and it could just be, they're working out in the summer, whatever. I think all of that would be cool for him to end up on a team like Brooklyn, which is kind of they're in the middle of I wouldn't even call it a rebuild, because they're not starting all over with a bunch of 20-year-olds, right? It's more of like kind of they're in the middle of that, right? They're going to be, I think, a competitive team next season. And if you add Tyler to that, I think he's a nice fit there. He'll still be on a somewhat winning situation. It's not a depressing city. It's not a depressing basketball situation. So I just think it makes a lot of sense there. He's going to be a very good player for years to come, but I don't think there'll be any regret.
I think Brooklyn's perfect for him, honestly. I think that it's he gets the New York spotlight, but they're not treated quite the same as the Knicks, so he won't get the hot spotlight as much. So to me, it's only positive. It's like if he can bring people to go watch him, exactly. It's a perfect fit. They all, like, if you look at the way they embraced Bridges last year and that run, it feels like Brooklyn is better off when they don't have all the stars, because the stars don't seem to really belong there. I mean, I'm talking about like the Durants and the Kyries, etc. They're always like, okay, they should be an MSG. But for a player like Tyler, if he can give you 20, 25 a night there, I think people will go watch him play, honestly. And Bridges plays hard. Cam Johnson plays hard. Claxton plays hard. Honestly, I think they probably would make the playoffs again. I think they'd probably be like a 6 seed, something along those lines. That's a really good fit for him. I thought San Antonio, but again, it's going to take longer for the Spurs. And then you look at OKC's situation; they just have so many pieces. I don't know. And then Toronto, I don't think Toronto's a great fit.
Well, OKC, I think, is going to be in that play-in mix next year too.
Oh, they should be. They were this year, and they should be better. Honestly, with Chet coming, Chet's probably going to be Rookie of the Year, I think. If I had to bet on somebody, that's who I would bet on right now. All right, so we'll see where things go. But again, I feel like you and I operate more in the middle here. And we mentioned, like, is there going to be regret? Well, look, the Heat regretted for years that they couldn't get Caron Butler back. They tried. They finally did on the coaching staff. But again, would they take back the 2006 championship or the 2005 going in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals? No. Would that have happened if they don't make the Shaq trade? Probably not. So that's just the way that these things play out. All right, thanks to our sponsors, PrizePicks. Use code 5FIVE, oceansfinest.com, ubreakwheelfix.com. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network.